Truth is dangerous because it changes the system, and the system punishes truth in order to protect itself. Truth is often presented as something simple, something that can be discovered, pointed at, and universally accepted. Yet history shows us that truth has rarely been simple and almost never comfortable, because truth does not merely inform, it disrupts, unsettles, and forces people to confront realities they would rather avoid. When people say they want the truth, what they usually want is not truth itself, but certainty, because certainty offers stability, and stability creates a sense of safety, while truth does the opposite, whispering uncomfortable possibilities such as "you might be wrong," or "the world you believe in may not be what you think it is," ideas that immediately produce anxiety rather than relief. Throughout history, truth has never existed in isolation. It has always been deeply entangled with power, belief, and identity, because what a society accepts as truth is often shaped by those who benefit from that acceptance. And when truth threatens this balance, it is no longer treated as knowledge, but as danger. In ancient times, humanity believed the earth stood at the center of the universe, not merely because it seemed logical, but because it placed humans at the center of existence, giving meaning, order, and reassurance to a fragile world. And when this belief was challenged, the crisis was not astronomical but psychological, because suddenly humanity was no longer central, no longer special, and no longer secure. This reveals a crucial insight. Truth does not only correct falsehoods, it reshapes how humans understand themselves, and people rarely react calmly when their self-image is threatened. Philosophers have long observed that truth rarely arrives welcomed and celebrated. Instead, it moves through predictable stages. First, it is ignored, then mocked, then attacked, and only much later accepted as obvious. But between these stages, those who speak truth often pay a heavy price. History presents a striking paradox. Societies claim to value truth, yet consistently punish those who reveal it. Because truth-tellers do not reinforce systems, they expose their fractures, and systems built on fragile foundations cannot tolerate exposure. Truth can take many forms: a statement, a question, a discovery, or even silence. But in every form, it challenges existing narratives, and not all systems survive being questioned, especially those that rely on fear, habit, and unquestioned obedience. Human psychology deepens this conflict because the mind naturally resists contradiction. It seeks comfort, familiarity, and confirmation, while truth introduces doubt, tension, and change. And thinking deeply is often far more exhausting than fighting openly. Perhaps this is why, throughout history, truth has been punished before it has been understood, because punishment is not only meant to silence the individual, but to warn everyone else. See what happens when this is said. At this point, truth ceases to be a purely philosophical concept and becomes a social and political force, shifting the question from what is true to something far more dangerous: who is allowed to say it? This is where our story begins, because if truth were simply about being correct, history would not be filled with prisons, exiles, trials, and executions of those who spoke it, which means the problem has never been truth itself, but what truth has the power to change. More than 2,000 years ago, Plato described a story that still explains human behavior better than most modern theories, not because it was complex, but because it was disturbingly accurate. He called it the allegory of the cave. In Plato's story, people are born chained inside a dark cave, unable to turn their heads, forced to look at a wall where shadows are projected by objects passing in front of a fire behind them. And because these shadows are the only reality they have ever known, they naturally assume that the shadows are the truth itself. They name them, they argue about them, they build beliefs around them, and most importantly, they feel safe with them. Because shadows never challenge the rules of the cave. Then one prisoner is freed. At first the light hurts his eyes, the fire blinds him. The outside world overwhelms him. Truth does not arrive as enlightenment. It arrives as pain. This is the first reason truth is uncomfortable. It disorients before it clarifies. The freed prisoner struggles, resists, and even wishes to return to the cave, because illusion, no matter how false, feels familiar, while truth feels hostile, demanding, and unforgiving. When he finally adjusts and understands reality, he does what Plato believed a philosopher must do. He returns to the cave to tell the others what he has seen. And this is where the allegory becomes terrifyingly realistic. The prisoners do not celebrate him. They do not thank him. They do not listen. They mock him. They accuse him of being confused. And eventually, they threaten to kill him. Not because he is wrong, but because he is dangerous. Because the moment he speaks, the shadows stop being harmless images and start becoming lies. This explains why truth is never comfortable. Truth is not just information. It is a threat to meaning. It does not simply say, "You were mistaken." It says, "Your world was built on something false." And humans do not defend lies. They defend the worlds built upon them. This is why truth feels violent, even when spoken gently, because it forces a collapse. And collapse is frightening, especially for those who have invested their identity, status, and sense of belonging in the existing illusion. Which leads to the next question. Why do humans love illusion so deeply? The answer is not stupidity. It is survival. Illusions offer coherence. They reduce complexity. They explain suffering. Illusions tell us who we are, where we belong, and what is expected of us. And in return, they ask for obedience, not understanding. Truth, on the other hand, offers no comfort guarantees. Truth introduces uncertainty. Truth creates responsibility. Truth removes excuses. To accept truth is to accept that you might need to change your beliefs, your loyalties, even your identity. And for most people, that price feels far higher than the benefit of being correct. History confirms this pattern again and again. Those who challenged religious certainty were labeled heretics. Those who questioned political myths were called traitors. Those who exposed social illusions were punished as destabilizers, not because their ideas failed, but because their ideas worked. Plato understood something fundamental. Societies are not held together by truth alone, but by shared illusions. And when those illusions collapse too quickly, chaos follows, which is why systems instinctively attack truth-tellers. Not always out of evil, but out of fear. Fear of disorder, fear of uncertainty, fear of losing control. And this is why illusion is seductive. Illusion tells people what they want to hear. Truth tells people what they need to confront. Illusion promises safety. Truth demands courage. This is why, when truth enters a system, it is rarely welcomed as a gift. It is treated as an intruder, a destabilizer, something that must be controlled, discredited, or destroyed before it spreads. Plato's cave was never just a story about ancient philosophy. It was a warning that humans will often choose shadows over sunlight, comfort over clarity, and illusion over truth. Not because truth is false, but because truth is costly. And as long as truth remains costly, history will continue to punish those who bring it into the light. People say they love truth, but what they really love is stability. People often claim that they want the truth because valuing truth sounds noble, intelligent, and morally strong. Yet history and human behavior repeatedly reveal something far less idealistic, that most people only want truth as long as it does not threaten the structure of their lives, their beliefs, or the world they have learned to feel safe within. What humans truly crave is not truth, but stability, because stability provides predictability, and predictability creates psychological safety, allowing people to wake up each day believing they understand how the world works, what is expected of them, and where they belong within it. Truth, on the other hand, is rarely gentle because it introduces uncertainty, disrupts routines, and forces individuals and societies to confront uncomfortable questions such as, what if everything we believed was wrong? Or what if our success, morality, or identity is built on a lie? Questions that feel less like enlightenment and more like existential threats. History consistently confirms this pattern. In ancient Athens, a society that proudly considered itself rational and enlightened, people claimed to value wisdom and debate. Yet when Socrates openly questioned common assumptions and exposed how little people truly knew, his pursuit of truth was not celebrated as intellectual courage, but condemned as social disruption because his questions threatened the stability of shared beliefs that held the city together. During the Middle Ages, European societies declared absolute devotion to divine truth. But this devotion only existed within carefully controlled boundaries, because when new astronomical truths challenged humanity's central position in the universe, the resistance was not rooted in scientific doubt, but in fear, since accepting those truths would destabilize humanity's sense of meaning, purpose, and divine importance. People did not reject these ideas because they were incomprehensible. They rejected them because they were destabilizing. Illusions, unlike truth, offer emotional comfort. They simplify reality. They assign blame. They explain suffering without demanding change. Truth does the opposite. Truth demands responsibility. Truth demands adjustment. Truth demands the painful admission that comfort may have been purchased at the cost of honesty. This is why societies often tolerate lies longer than they tolerate truth, because lies maintain order, while truth invites transformation, and transformation threatens those who benefit from the existing arrangement. Empires, institutions, and ideologies throughout history have instinctively understood this, which is why they have repeatedly punished truth-tellers, not necessarily because they were wrong, but because they were effective, because a single uncomfortable truth can unravel narratives that took generations to construct. Psychology reinforces this reality. The human mind is wired to avoid cognitive dissonance, the mental stress caused by holding contradictory beliefs, which is why people often reject evidence that challenges their worldview, preferring familiar falsehoods over unfamiliar truths, even when the truth is logically stronger. In this sense, choosing illusion is not a sign of ignorance, but of self-preservation. At a personal level, individuals may say they value honesty, but at a collective level, societies prioritize continuity, because continuity ensures survival, hierarchy, and identity, while truth threatens to rearrange all three. If humanity truly loved truth more than stability, history would not be filled with repeated mistakes, repeated injustices, and repeated collapses, because each new truth would correct the last failure. Yet instead, we observe the same patterns resurfacing under new names, new leaders, and new symbols. This reveals a deeply uncomfortable conclusion. People love the idea of truth, but they live for stability, and as long as stability feels safer than transformation, truth will continue to be resisted, delayed, and punished. Not because it is false, but because it refuses to leave the world unchanged. Power does not collapse because of enemies at the gates. It collapses when people stop believing the story that justifies its existence, and this is precisely why truth has always been more dangerous to power than rebellion, violence, or war. Revolutions can be crushed, armies can be defeated, but truth does something far more destructive. It redefines reality. Every system of power is built on a narrative. a carefully maintained explanation of why certain people rule, why certain rules exist, and why obedience is necessary. And as long as this narrative remains unquestioned, power appears natural, inevitable, and even legitimate. Truth threatens power because it asks a forbidden question. Why? Why should this person rule? Why should this law exist? Why should this suffering be accepted as normal? The moment these questions are asked, power is forced to defend itself, and defense is the first sign of weakness. Throughout history, rulers have understood something instinctively. People do not obey force alone. They obey meaning because force without meaning produces fear, but fear without belief eventually produces resistance, and belief can only survive as long as truth is controlled. This is why power fears truth more than lies told by enemies. Lies from outside can be dismissed as propaganda. Truth from within cannot. When truth comes from a philosopher, a scientist, a witness, or an insider, it destabilizes authority at its core because it exposes the gap between what power claims to be and what it actually is. In ancient Athens, democracy prided itself on reason and debate. Yet when Socrates used truth not as doctrine but as questioning, the city responded with execution because his questions did not attack the state directly. They attacked the confidence of its citizens, revealing how fragile their knowledge and certainty truly were. In medieval Europe, kings and churches did not fear ignorance. They depended on it, because ignorance preserves hierarchy, while truth equalizes, making people realize that authority is not divine by nature, but constructed, maintained, and enforced. When Galileo challenged the geocentric model of the universe, the threat was not astronomical, but political and theological, because a universe no longer centered on Earth was also a universe no longer centered on inherited authority, tradition, and unquestioned truth. Truth threatened power because it removed humanity from the center. And once humans are no longer central, neither are their rulers. This pattern repeats endlessly. Truth exposes that laws are not eternal. Truth exposes that borders are not sacred. Truth exposes that traditions are choices made by the past, not commands issued by destiny. Power survives by presenting itself as permanent. Truth reveals that it is temporary. This is why power reacts to truth with punishment rather than debate. Debate implies equality. Punishment implies dominance. By punishing truth-tellers, power sends a message not only to the individual, but to society at large. Questioning the system is not an intellectual exercise. It is a risk. And this fear works. People learn quickly that silence is safer than accuracy, that repetition is safer than reflection, and that loyalty is rewarded more consistently than honesty, creating a culture where truth becomes socially expensive and conformity becomes psychologically efficient. At a deeper level, truth threatens power because it decentralizes authority. When people understand reality for themselves, they no longer need interpreters, priests, or rulers to explain the world to them. And this independence is intolerable to systems that rely on dependence to survive. Truth empowers individuals to think. Power requires individuals to obey. These two goals are fundamentally incompatible. Modern societies may no longer burn philosophers or imprison astronomers, but the mechanism remains the same. Truth is discredited, mocked, drowned in noise, or framed as dangerous misinformation, not because it lacks evidence, but because it undermines control. The methods evolve. The fear does not. Power fears truth because truth creates comparison between what is promised and what is delivered, between what is claimed and what is practiced. And comparison is the enemy of legitimacy. Once people see alternatives, obedience becomes optional. And when obedience becomes optional, power must either reform or repress. History shows us which option is chosen most often. This is why truth is punished first, not because it destroys systems instantly, but because it begins a process. Power cannot stop once it starts. The slow awakening of people who realize that the world they accepted as unchangeable was always more fragile than they were told. Socrates did not write books. He did not lead armies. He did not attempt to overthrow the government. He simply asked questions, and history decided that this was unforgivable. Ancient Athens liked to see itself as the birthplace of reason, democracy, and free thought, a city that celebrated debate and intelligence. Yet this self-image collapsed the moment Socrates began exposing how fragile that intelligence truly was, because his questions did not flatter power, they stripped it bare. Socrates walked the streets of Athens asking ordinary citizens, politicians, generals, and respected thinkers what they believed were simple questions. What is justice? What is virtue? What is wisdom? And the danger was not that people lacked answers. The danger was that they believed they already had them. Socrates did not accuse anyone of ignorance directly. Instead, he allowed people to reveal it themselves, calmly guiding conversations until confident opinions collapsed into confusion. And this public unraveling of certainty was deeply humiliating for a society built on reputation, honor, and status. What made Socrates truly dangerous was not his intelligence, but his method. He did not replace old beliefs with new doctrines. He did not offer comforting alternatives. He left people with uncertainty, and uncertainty is far more destabilizing than opposition. In a system that depends on shared assumptions, a man who turns certainty into doubt becomes a threat, because doubt spreads quietly, invisibly, and uncontrollably, undermining authority not through force, but through awareness. Athens tolerated disagreement. It did not tolerate embarrassment. As Socrates continued questioning, the city's leaders began to realize that he was not merely challenging individuals, but exposing a deeper truth, that much of what Athens believed about itself was built on unexamined assumptions, inherited traditions, and intellectual shortcuts masquerading as wisdom. This realization was intolerable. Eventually, formal charges were brought against him. He was accused of corrupting the youth and impiety, not because he rejected the gods, but because he refused to accept the version of morality and belief that supported the existing social order. Notice the pattern. Truth is rarely punished for being false. It is punished for being disruptive. At his trial, Socrates did something extraordinary. He refused to beg. He refused to apologize for questioning. He refused to present himself as harmless. Instead, he argued that questioning was not a crime, but a duty, and that a society that silences inquiry condemns itself to intellectual decay, a claim that only reinforced the fear of those already threatened by his presence. The jury found him guilty. But even then, Socrates could have escaped death. He was offered the opportunity to propose an alternative punishment, something less severe than execution. Yet instead of choosing exile or silence, he suggested that he deserved to be rewarded for his service to the city, a statement that was not arrogance but a devastating philosophical challenge, the idea that truth should be honored, not feared. This sealed his fate. Socrates was sentenced to death by poison. In his final hours, surrounded by students, he did not curse Athens or rage against injustice. Instead, he calmly discussed the nature of the soul, duty, and morality, demonstrating through action what he had taught through words, that living truthfully matters more than living safely. His execution marked a turning point in history. Athens killed Socrates not because it hated truth, but because it loved stability more. His questions threatened to destabilize the intellectual comfort that allowed citizens to feel wise without examination, morale without reflection, and just without effort. By killing Socrates, Athens sent a clear message. Questioning the foundations of society is more dangerous than ignorance, and yet the irony is brutal. Socrates died, but his questions survived. The city that executed him is remembered less for its power than for the man it silenced, because truth does not need armies to endure. It only needs memory. Socrates proved something that history would repeat endlessly, that asking questions can be more threatening than making accusations, and that societies will often destroy those who expose their intellectual illusions, not because those illusions are sacred, but because without them, the system feels unbearably unstable. He asked questions. They killed him. And in doing so, they confirmed the very truth they feared, that power collapses the moment people begin to think for themselves. Socrates did not write books. He did not lead armies. He did not attempt to overthrow the government. He simply asked questions, and history decided that this was unforgivable. Ancient Athens liked to see itself as the birthplace of reason, democracy, and free thought, a city that celebrated debate and intelligence. Yet this self-image collapsed the moment Socrates began exposing how fragile that intelligence truly was, because his questions did not flatter power, they stripped it bare. Socrates walked the streets of Athens asking ordinary citizens, politicians, generals, and respected thinkers what they believed were simple questions. What is justice? What is virtue? What is wisdom? And the danger was not that people lacked answers. The danger was that they believed they already had them. Socrates did not accuse anyone of ignorance directly. Instead, he allowed people to reveal it themselves, calmly guiding conversations until confident opinions collapsed into confusion. And this public unraveling of certainty was deeply humiliating for a society built on reputation, honor, and status. What made Socrates truly dangerous was not his intelligence, but his method. He did not replace old beliefs with new doctrines. He did not offer comforting alternatives. He left people with uncertainty, and uncertainty is far more destabilizing than opposition. In a system that depends on shared assumptions, a man who turns certainty into doubt becomes a threat, because doubt spreads quietly, invisibly, and uncontrollably, undermining authority not through force, but through awareness. Athens tolerated disagreement. It did not tolerate embarrassment. As Socrates continued questioning, the city's leaders began to realize that he was not merely challenging individuals, but exposing a deeper truth, that much of what Athens believed about itself was built on unexamined assumptions, inherited traditions, and intellectual shortcuts masquerading as wisdom. This realization was intolerable. Eventually, formal charges were brought against him. He was accused of corrupting the youth and impiety, not because he rejected the gods, but because he refused to accept the version of morality and belief that supported the existing social order. Notice the pattern. Truth is rarely punished for being false. It is punished for being disruptive. At his trial, Socrates did something extraordinary. He refused to beg. He refused to apologize for questioning. He refused to present himself as harmless. Instead, he argued that questioning was not a crime, but a duty, and that a society that silences inquiry condemns itself to intellectual decay, a claim that only reinforced the fear of those already threatened by his presence. The jury found him guilty. But even then, Socrates could have escaped death. He was offered the opportunity to propose an alternative punishment, something less severe than execution. Yet instead of choosing exile or silence, he suggested that he deserved to be rewarded for his service to the city, a statement that was not arrogance but a devastating philosophical challenge, the idea that truth should be honored, not feared. This sealed his fate. Socrates was sentenced to death by poison. In his final hours, surrounded by students, he did not curse Athens or rage against injustice. Instead, he calmly discussed the nature of the soul, duty, and morality, demonstrating through action what he had taught through words, that living truthfully matters more than living safely. His execution marked a turning point in history. Athens killed Socrates not because it hated truth, but because it loved stability more. His questions threatened to destabilize the intellectual comfort that allowed citizens to feel wise without examination, morale without reflection, and just without effort. By killing Socrates, Athens sent a clear message. Questioning the foundations of society is more dangerous than ignorance, and yet the irony is brutal. Socrates died, but his questions survived. The city that executed him is remembered less for its power than for the man it silenced, because truth does not need armies to endure. It only needs memory. Socrates proved something that history would repeat endlessly, that asking questions can be more threatening than making accusations, and that societies will often destroy those who expose their intellectual illusions, not because those illusions are sacred, but because without them, the system feels unbearably unstable. He asked questions. They killed him. And in doing so, they confirmed the very truth they feared, that power collapses the moment people begin to think for themselves. Galileo did not challenge a king, an army, or a government directly. He challenged something far more sacred, the structure of the universe as power understood it. For centuries, Europe lived inside a carefully ordered cosmos, a universe where Earth stood immobile at the center, surrounded by perfect heavenly spheres, watched over by God, interpreted by the Church, and explained through inherited authority rather than observation, a model that offered not only scientific certainty, but emotional and political stability. This universe told people who they were. It told them where they stood. And most importantly, it told them who had the right to interpret reality. Galileo changed this with a telescope. When he turned his lens toward the night sky, he did not see perfection. He saw imperfections, craters on the moon, spots on the sun, and moons orbiting Jupiter instead of Earth. Discoveries that quietly but decisively shattered the idea that everything in the heavens revolved around humanity and its rulers. The danger of Galileo's work was not that it contradicted Scripture directly, but that it replaced authority with evidence, tradition with observation, and belief with demonstration. And in doing so, it threatened the intellectual monopoly that power had long enjoyed over truth. If Earth was not the center, then humanity was not the center. And if humanity was not the center, then neither were its institutions. This was the real threat. Galileo did not shout. He did not rebel. He simply showed, and showing was unforgivable. For the Church, accepting Galileo's findings would not merely mean adjusting astronomy textbooks. It would mean admitting that centuries of interpretation could be questioned by a single man with a tool and the courage to trust his own eyes. Truth, once visible, becomes contagious. Galileo's ideas spread rapidly among scholars, and with them spread a far more dangerous notion that reality could be understood without permission, that one did not need institutional authority to access truth, only curiosity, patience, and reason. Power responded predictably. Galileo was summoned, warned, and eventually tried, not because his observations were disproven, but because they were persuasive, and persuasion is a threat to systems built on obedience rather than understanding. During his trial, Galileo was not asked to prove his claims scientifically. The evidence was already too strong. He was asked to deny them publicly, because power does not fear private truth, it fears public acceptance. Faced with the threat of torture and execution, Galileo recanted. He spoke the words power demanded, but even in submission, The damage was done. The universe had already shifted. The earth continued to move, whether acknowledged or not, and this revealed a fundamental truth about power. It can force silence, but it cannot force reality to change. Galileo's punishment was not meant to correct him, it was meant to warn others. It told the world, observe carefully, but speak cautiously, think freely, but submit publicly. This pattern would repeat again and again in history. Galileo lived under house arrest for the rest of his life, isolated, watched, and silenced. Yet his ideas escaped confinement because truth does not require freedom to exist. It only requires time. The irony is unmistakable. The institution that condemned Galileo claimed to defend divine truth, yet feared empirical truth, because empirical truth cannot be controlled, interpreted selectively, or confined to authority. It belongs to anyone willing to look. Galileo revealed that power's greatest fear is not contradiction, but independence, because an independent mind does not ask permission before understanding. And once people learn to look for themselves, power loses its exclusive role as the interpreter of reality. This is why Galileo mattered, not because he proved the earth moved, but because he proved that truth does not need approval. His conflict was never truly between science and religion. It was between truth and control, between a universe discovered and a universe dictated, and history would learn the same lesson again and again. When truth lifts humanity's eyes beyond the structures of power, power will always try to pull those eyes back down. But once seen, the sky can never be unseen. Thomas More did not shout in the streets. He did not write manifestos. He did not lead a rebellion. What made him dangerous was far more subtle. He refused to speak when power demanded obedience. In an age when loyalty was measured not by actions, but by words, silence became a political crime because silence could not be controlled, twisted, or publicly displayed as submission, and for a system that relied on visible agreement, this was intolerable. Henry VIII did not need everyone to love him. He needed them to confirm him. When the king declared himself the supreme head of the church, the demand was simple. Sign the oath, speak the words, affirm the new reality, and continue living safely within the system. Thomas More understood the trap immediately. To speak was to legitimize. To sign was to participate. To remain silent was to refuse without attacking. And this made his resistance uniquely dangerous. More believed that power feeds on affirmation, not force, because a ruler can survive enemies but cannot survive doubt disguised as compliance, and silence preserves doubt in its purest form. By refusing to speak, More denied the king what he needed most: moral confirmation. He did not say, "You are wrong." He did not say, "I oppose you." He said nothing, and nothing, in this context, spoke louder than rebellion. Silence exposed a terrifying truth about authority, that its legitimacy depends on participation, and when participation is withdrawn, even peacefully, power begins to wobble. The state could not tolerate this. If silence were allowed, it would spread. Others might realize they too could avoid open confrontation while refusing inward surrender, creating a population that appeared obedient but remained unconvinced. And such a population is the nightmare of every regime. This is why More's silence was reframed as treason, not because he acted against the king, but because he refused to act for him. In prison, More was pressured repeatedly to speak, to clarify his position, to explain himself, because explanation creates leverage, and words can be manipulated, but silence offered no foothold. Every day he remained silent. He proved that conscience does not require expression to exist. More understood something deeply unsettling for power, that resistance does not always announce itself. and that the most effective defiance may appear as calm obedience, while internally remaining unyielding. At his trial, the absurdity of the charges revealed the fear beneath them. He was accused not of rebellion, but of refusing to confirm reality as power defined it, and this forced the court to twist silence into guilt, proving that the system itself recognized how threatening his restraint truly was. Even then, More could have saved himself. A single sentence, a single spoken affirmation, a brief surrender of language. But he chose death over participation. His execution was not meant to punish a criminal. It was meant to erase a precedent. The idea that one could stand within the system, follow the law outwardly, and yet refuse to surrender inward freedom. Thomas More's silence revealed something history rarely acknowledges, that power depends not only on obedience, but on shared belief. And when belief is withdrawn quietly, power has no visible enemy to fight, only a growing emptiness beneath its authority. Centuries later, More's resistance remains unsettling because it challenges a comforting myth that courage always looks loud, dramatic, and confrontational. Sometimes courage looks like refusal to speak. Sometimes resistance is simply the decision not to lie. And sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can do is deny power the words it needs to survive. Thomas More did not defeat the crown, but he exposed its fragility, and in doing so he demonstrated a form of resistance so subtle, so disciplined, and so devastating that history had to silence him, because silence, when chosen freely, is the one weapon power cannot disarm. Giordano Bruno was not executed because he discovered a planet, calculated an orbit, or built a telescope. He was executed because he dared to imagine a universe too vast for power to control. Unlike Galileo, Bruno did not soften his ideas. Unlike Thomas More, he did not hide behind silence. He spoke openly and endlessly, and that made him impossible to contain. In the late 16th century, the universe was still understood as a closed system, carefully ordered, hierarchical, and finite, with Earth placed meaningfully within it, watched over by God, interpreted by the Church, and mirrored by political authority on Earth, creating a cosmos that justified obedience by presenting order as divine and permanent. Bruno shattered this image. He proposed that the universe was infinite, without a center, filled with countless worlds, countless suns, and possibly countless forms of life, an idea so radical that it did not merely challenge theology or astronomy, but annihilated the psychological foundation upon which authority rested. If the universe has no center, then humanity is not central. If humanity is not central, then neither is its power. And if power is not central, then it is not sacred. This was the true crime. Bruno's ideas dissolved hierarchy itself. In an infinite universe, no single institution could claim exclusive access to truth, because infinity cannot be owned, interpreted fully, or controlled. And a truth that cannot be controlled is the ultimate threat to any system built on monopoly of meaning. What made Bruno especially dangerous was not just what he believed, but how he believed it. He did not ask permission. He did not retreat. He did not compromise. He traveled across Europe, lecturing, debating, and provoking, refusing to confine his mind within the acceptable limits of doctrine. And in doing so, he embodied something power fears deeply: intellectual independence without restraint. For years, Bruno evaded execution, moving from city to city, tolerated but never trusted, admired but always watched, until eventually he was betrayed, arrested, and handed over to the Roman Inquisition. His trial lasted years, not days, not weeks, years. During this time, Bruno was given countless opportunities to recant, to soften his claims, to deny infinity, to return the universe to a size power could manage. He refused, because to deny infinity would be to deny truth itself. The Inquisition was not interested in debate. Debate assumes the possibility of change. Power does not debate truths that threaten its existence. It erases them. Bruno was not condemned for a single statement, but for a worldview that made control meaningless, because in an infinite universe no single authority can claim final interpretation, and no institution can stand as the ultimate mediator between reality and humanity. When Bruno was finally sentenced, the verdict was clear: death by burning, not execution, purification. Fire was symbolic. It was meant to destroy not just the body, but the idea, to turn infinite thought into finite ash, and to warn others that imagining beyond accepted limits would carry unbearable consequences. As he was led to the stake in 1600, Bruno reportedly refused to repent, facing death without apology because he understood something deeply unsettling for power: that killing a body does not shrink the universe. The flames consumed him, but they did not consume infinity. History would later rehabilitate Bruno, celebrating him as a visionary, a martyr of free thought, and a symbol of intellectual courage. But this recognition came centuries too late to save him, because truth rarely protects those who reveal it first. Bruno's execution reveals a final, brutal lesson in the history of truth. Some truths are not merely inconvenient, they are existential threats. Bruno did not challenge a belief. He challenged the scale of reality itself, and when reality becomes too large for power to manage, power responds not with argument, but with annihilation. He was burned because infinity cannot be imprisoned, and in burning him, authority revealed its deepest fear: not that it might be wrong, but that it might be irrelevant in a universe without limits. Giordano Bruno did not live to see his truth accepted, but his death marked the moment humanity first glimpsed a universe so vast that no throne, no church, and no ideology could ever fully contain it. And that truth, once imagined, could never be burned away, because lies can be repeated. Truth creates argument. Power has never loved lies because lies are stronger than truth. Power loves lies because lies are simple, repeatable, and uncontested, while truth is complex, disruptive, and invites debate. And debate is the one thing power cannot fully control. A lie can be spoken again and again without changing its shape. It requires no explanation. It asks no questions. Its strength does not come from accuracy, but from familiarity. The more a lie is repeated, the more it feels normal, and what feels normal is rarely challenged, because the human mind is wired to accept repetition as reassurance, not as a warning. Power learned this early. Throughout history, rulers did not govern by truth alone, but by narratives, simplified stories about identity, enemies, destiny, and order. Because narratives unify, while truth divides, and division creates uncertainty. Truth behaves differently. Truth is not static. Truth demands context. Truth provokes interpretation. Each time truth is spoken, it raises new questions. What does this mean? Who benefits from this? What must change now? And once questions begin, authority weakens. This is why power fears discussion more than rebellion. Rebellion can be crushed. Discussion spreads. A lie tells people what to think. Truth forces people to think, and thinking is dangerous. When power repeats a lie, it creates consensus without understanding, obedience without reflection, and loyalty without conviction, producing a society that appears stable on the surface, even if it is intellectually hollow beneath. Truth destroys this illusion. Truth exposes contradictions between promises and reality. Truth reveals that laws are not eternal truths, but human decisions. Truth shows that traditions were once choices, not destiny, and when people realize this, power loses its most valuable asset: inevitability. This is why truth always creates argument. Argument leads to disagreement. Disagreement leads to comparison. Comparison leads to judgment. And judgment is fatal to authority. Power does not collapse because people suddenly rebel. It collapses when people begin to compare what they are told with what they observe. And that comparison is born from truth, not from lies. Historically, truth-tellers are rarely punished for being wrong. They are punished for being persuasive. A single repeated lie creates silence. A single revealed truth creates conversation. Power prefers silence. Lies produce silence because they close meaning. Truth produces noise because it opens meaning. This is why truth-tellers are labeled troublemakers, destabilizers, or enemies of order, because from the perspective of power, order matters more than accuracy, and stability matters more than honesty. Psychology supports this pattern. Humans instinctively avoid cognitive dissonance, the discomfort caused by holding conflicting beliefs, which is why many people prefer a familiar falsehood to an unfamiliar truth, especially when the truth demands change, responsibility, or loss of privilege. Power exploits this tendency. By repeating lies, authority aligns itself with psychological comfort, while truth aligns itself with discomfort, and discomfort is easily framed as danger. In this sense, power does not merely suppress truth. It frames truth as a threat, something divisive, confusing, or harmful to unity, while presenting lies as protection, clarity, and peace. This framing works. Societies often choose order over honesty, repetition over reflection, and stability over transformation, not because truth is weak, but because truth is expensive. It costs certainty, it costs comfort, it costs obedience. This is why lies are rewarded, while truth is punished. Lies maintain control, truth redistributes it, and power, by its nature, resists redistribution. So when power repeats a lie, it is not merely deceiving, it is stabilizing itself. And when truth appears, it is not merely informing, it is threatening to change everything. That is why power loves lies, not because lies last forever, but because truth never stays silent. People don't reject truth because they are stupid. They reject truth because truth threatens something deeper than information. It threatens identity, belonging, and psychological safety. The human mind is not designed to seek truth above all else. It is designed to help us survive, and survival often depends less on being correct and more on staying connected to the group, maintaining emotional stability, and protecting a coherent sense of self. That is why, when truth arrives, the first reaction is often not curiosity, but resistance. 1. Truth creates pain before it creates clarity. Truth often comes with discomfort because it forces the mind to confront contradiction, and contradiction produces stress. When something challenges what we already believe, the brain experiences it as a form of threat, not necessarily physical but psychological, because our beliefs are the maps we use to navigate the world. If the map is wrong, we feel lost. So instead of updating the map, people often attack the messenger, ignore the evidence, or retreat into familiar explanations, because uncertainty feels more dangerous than inaccuracy. This is why many societies punish truth-tellers. The truth makes people feel unstable, and humans instinctively punish whatever makes them feel unstable. 2. Cognitive dissonance. The mind hates contradiction. One of the strongest psychological forces behind truth resistance is cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that appears when new information conflicts with existing beliefs. If someone believes their nation is always righteous, then evidence of injustice feels unbearable. If someone believes their leader is noble, then proof of corruption feels like betrayal. If someone believes they are a good person, then evidence of harm caused by their actions feels humiliating. To reduce this discomfort, the mind chooses the easiest path. Deny the evidence, minimize it, reframe it, or attack whoever revealed it. The goal is not truth. The goal is emotional relief. This is why truth causes argument, because argument is often a defense mechanism, not a search for understanding. 3. Identity protection. Truth can feel like personal attack. Most beliefs are not just ideas, they become part of identity. Religion, politics, morality, national pride, and social values often function as personal identity markers, meaning that when a truth threatens those beliefs, it doesn't feel like I learned something new. It feels like I am being attacked. And when identity is threatened, people react with the same intensity as physical danger: anger, defensiveness, denial, and sometimes violence. This helps explain why heretics, whistleblowers, and reformers were so often treated as enemies. They weren't just challenging facts, they were challenging who people thought they were. 4. Belonging. Truth can expel you from the tribe. Humans are social survival creatures. For most of human history, being rejected by the group could mean death. So the brain learned a rule: belonging is safer than accuracy. This is why people sometimes reject truths they privately suspect are real, because admitting those truths would separate them from their community, family, religion, party, or nation. In many historical moments, people did not follow the crowd because the crowd was right. They followed the crowd because the crowd was powerful, and isolation was terrifying. Truth can cost you relationships. Lies can protect them. So many people choose the lie. 5. The comfort of simple stories. Truth is often complicated. It has nuance, trade-offs, context, and uncertainty. But humans prefer simple stories because simple stories reduce anxiety. A simple story has a clear hero, a clear villain, a clear cause, a clear solution. Truth rarely looks like that. This is why propaganda is so effective. It converts complexity into certainty, and certainty feels like strength. A lie that feels clear often beats a truth that feels complicated. 6. Fear of responsibility. Truth demands change. A truth is not just an idea. It is often a command. If the truth reveals injustice, it implies responsibility. If the truth reveals corruption, it demands action. If the truth reveals harm, it forces moral choice. And moral choice is exhausting. So people unconsciously reject truth to avoid the burden of change. In this sense, denying truth is not ignorance. It is an escape from responsibility. 7. Authority and trust. Who said it? People don't evaluate truth purely by evidence. They evaluate it by source because trusting evidence takes effort. But trusting a person or institution feels easier. So when truth comes from a disliked source, it is rejected even if it is correct. And when falsehood comes from a trusted source, it is accepted even if it is wrong. This is why regimes protect official truth, and why dissenters are framed as unreliable. Once trust is destroyed, evidence no longer matters. This psychology becomes history when systems exploit it. When Socrates asked questions, he triggered dissonance, identity threat, and social embarrassment. Athens removed him. When Galileo revealed an inconvenient universe, he threatened the authority that defined meaning. The institution demanded recantation. When Thomas More refused to affirm the king's supremacy, his silence threatened social unity. The state made an example of him. Each case is different, but the psychological mechanism is the same. Truth destabilizes. Humans resist instability. Power weaponizes this resistance. So people oppose truth not because they hate reality, but because they fear what reality will do to their identity, their tribe, their comfort, and their responsibilities. And this is why truth is punished first. because psychologically punishing truth restores the feeling of stability, even if stability is built on illusion. Cognitive dissonance is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology, not because it controls what people think, but because it controls how people protect themselves from emotional pain, since it emerges when a person is forced to hold two conflicting ideas at the same time. I am right, and I might be wrong. A tension the human mind finds deeply uncomfortable and instinctively tries to eliminate. People often believe that refusing to admit mistakes is simply arrogance, but in reality, it is more often an act of psychological self-preservation, because admitting error is rarely just about facts. It can feel like an attack on identity, dignity, and self-worth. 1. Why do people refuse to admit they are wrong? Because mistakes are rarely isolated ideas. Over time, beliefs become investments. People invest years of trust, loyalty, emotion, and public defense into ideas, leaders, nations, religions, and moral positions. And once that investment is made, admitting error feels less like I learned something new and more like a part of my life was built on a lie. And that realization is devastating. Admitting a mistake can mean admitting I defended the wrong thing. I trusted the wrong people. I hurt others for no reason. My sense of judgment failed. For the brain, this is not intellectual discomfort. It is existential threat. So instead of changing beliefs, the mind changes explanations. The evidence is fake. The source is biased. This is propaganda. You don't understand the full context. These reactions protect emotions, not truth. People do not reject truth because they lack logic. They reject truth because they are trying to avoid shame, guilt, and loss of identity. 2. How cognitive dissonance distorts reality. When reality clashes with belief, the brain often chooses the path of least pain. If someone sees themselves as moral and just, but is confronted with evidence that their actions or group caused harm, they face two options: accept responsibility and change self-image. Reframe the harm as justified, exaggerated, or deserved. The second option is easier. This is why entire societies have justified cruelty, discrimination, and violence while still believing themselves to be righteous. Because cognitive dissonance transforms moral discomfort into moral certainty. Truth is not rejected because it is unclear. It is rejected because it is too clear. Accepting it would demand accountability, and accountability threatens emotional stability. 3. Why are truth-tellers labeled traitors? Because truth does not merely challenge facts. It challenges group cohesion. Humans are tribal by nature. Belonging provides safety, identity, and meaning. Every group survives on a shared story, a narrative that explains who we are, why we are right, and why they are wrong. And this story does not have to be fully true. It only has to be shared. A truth-teller introduces cracks into that story, and cracks feel dangerous. From the group's perspective, the truth-teller weakens unity, exposes vulnerability, gives ammunition to enemies, disrupts stability. So the truth-teller is reframed, not as someone seeking accuracy, but as someone threatening survival. This is where the word traitor appears. Calling someone a traitor is not an argument. It is a social weapon designed to end discussion without addressing evidence. Once someone is labeled a traitor, their facts are no longer examined, their motives are questioned, their voice is dismissed as dangerous. This tactic appears again and again in history. Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth. Galileo was accused of misleading the faithful. Thomas More was accused of betrayal. In every case, the accusation was not about facts. It was about loyalty. 4. Belonging feels safer than truth. At a deep psychological level, the human brain prioritizes belonging over accuracy because for most of evolutionary history, being rejected by the group meant death. So the mind learned a rule. It is safer to be wrong together than right alone. Truth can isolate, illusion can unite. That is why people often privately suspect the truth but publicly reject it, because social exile feels more dangerous than intellectual error. 5. The final pattern. Cognitive dissonance explains a brutal historical pattern. Truth creates discomfort. Discomfort triggers defense. Defense seeks a target. The truth teller becomes the target. The problem is never that the truth exists. The problem is that the truth forces change, and change threatens identity, loyalty, and emotional stability. So instead of changing beliefs, societies punish messengers. This is why truth is called betrayal. Not because it harms the group, but because it reveals what the group does not want to see, and humans punish what causes pain. Truth hurts because it shatters the image people have built of themselves, their beliefs, their moral certainty, and their sense of being right. And the human mind experiences this shattering not as enlightenment, but as threat, because the brain did not evolve to seek truth at any cost. It evolved to avoid pain and preserve psychological stability. Pain, whether physical or emotional, is registered by the brain as danger, and danger demands an immediate response, which is why humans instinctively react against whatever causes pain, even when that pain comes from truth rather than harm. When people encounter truth, they do not respond first with reason. They respond with feeling, and that feeling is often shame, fear, guilt, or humiliation, because truth has a way of saying, "You were wrong, your side was not innocent," or "You participated in something harmful." And these realizations cut deeply into the human ego. And humans do not negotiate with pain. They try to eliminate it. History shows this pattern with brutal clarity. When Socrates asked questions in Athens, he did not attack the state, raise weapons, or incite rebellion. Yet his questions forced people to confront their own ignorance, and that confrontation was painful because it stripped away the comforting belief that they were wise, moral, and knowledgeable. The pain did not come from Socrates' words. It came from self-recognition, and instead of enduring that pain and growing from it, the city chose the faster relief. Removing the source of discomfort, Socrates was executed. The pain subsided. The illusion returned. The same mechanism appears centuries later when humanity was told that Earth was not the center of the universe, because this truth did not merely rearrange astronomy, it wounded humanity's sense of cosmic importance, turning humans from the focal point of creation into one element among many, and that realization created existential pain far deeper than scientific disagreement. So the truth-bearers were silenced, not because they were proven wrong, but because they were emotionally unbearable. Humans punish truth-tellers not because truth is false, but because truth forces self-reckoning, and self-reckoning is one of the most painful psychological experiences a person or society can endure. Accepting truth often means accepting responsibility, responsibility for past actions, responsibility for past silence, responsibility for benefiting from injustice, and responsibility demands change. Change threatens comfort, change threatens identity, change threatens power. So instead of changing, people redirect the pain outward. They label the truth-teller as dangerous. They accuse them of betrayal. They frame them as enemies of order, because if the truth-teller is the problem, then the truth itself can be ignored. This pattern repeats relentlessly through history. Galileo Galilei revealed a universe that no longer revolved around humanity, and the emotional pain of that realization was so intense that power chose denial over acceptance. Giordano Bruno imagined an infinite universe without hierarchy or center, and the pain of losing cosmic superiority was so overwhelming that it was easier to burn the man than to confront the implications of his ideas. Thomas More refused to speak words he did not believe, and his silence forced society to confront the possibility that obedience was not moral, and that realization was so painful that the system chose execution over introspection. In every case, the sequence is the same. Truth appears, pain follows, punishment begins, because punishment restores the illusion of control. Punishing the truth-teller sends a message: this pain was caused by them, not by reality. And once that message is accepted, society can return to psychological comfort without changing anything meaningful. Truth is painful because it exposes contradictions between who we believe we are and what we have actually done, and humans instinctively protect their self-image, even at the cost of justice, honesty, and progress. Truth wounds before it heals, but healing takes time, humility, and courage, and humans often prefer immediate relief to long-term growth. That is why lies are embraced. They anesthetize pain. And that is why truth is punished. It refuses to numb. So throughout history, truth has been treated not as a gift, but as an attack, not because it seeks destruction, but because it refuses to let humanity remain comfortable inside illusion. Truth hurts, and humans, again and again, have chosen to punish the pain rather than confront its cause. History reveals a disturbing pattern. Humanity claims to value truth, celebrate honesty, and honor courage. Yet when truth actually appears, the first response is rarely acceptance. It is fear, because truth is never just information. It is disruption, and disruption threatens the structures that give people a sense of order, identity, and control. Across centuries, the methods of punishing truth have changed, but the logic behind them has remained strikingly consistent. Truth is first dismissed, then reframed as dangerous, and finally silenced or destroyed, not because it is false, but because it destabilizes what already exists. 1. Ancient societies, when questioning itself becomes a crime. In early civilizations, truth was often punished not for what it said, but for the fact that it asked questions, because questioning immediately implies that authority, tradition, or belief may not be absolute, and the mere presence of doubt can be more threatening than open rebellion. At this stage, the most dangerous individual was not the one who spoke incorrectly, but the one who questioned openly, because incorrect speech can be corrected, but questioning spreads curiosity, and curiosity cannot be easily controlled. This is why some of the earliest punishments of truth took the form of public trials, where the goal was not to discover facts, but to force the truth seeker into silence, retraction, or submission, turning the act of thinking itself into an offense. 2. Sacred order and religion. Truth reframed as heresy. As societies became more structured, truth began to threaten not only political power, but sacred authority. And when truth challenges what is considered holy, it is no longer debated, it is condemned. In these eras, truth was often labeled as heresy, blasphemy, or corruption, because once truth is framed as morally dangerous, discussion becomes unnecessary, and fear replaces reasoning. The accusation alone was enough. People no longer asked, "Is this true?" They asked, "Is this dangerous?" And danger demanded punishment. This shift was crucial because it allowed power to avoid engaging with evidence entirely, transforming truth from a question of reality into a question of loyalty and obedience. 3. Renaissance and science. Truth is managed, not destroyed. With the rise of science and humanism, outright destruction of truth became less acceptable. But suppression did not disappear. It simply became more refined. Truth was no longer always burned at the stake. It was marginalized, delayed, softened, or hidden behind institutional walls, while its messengers were discredited, isolated, or stripped of credibility. This is a more subtle punishment because While the individual may survive, the idea is neutralized, and society is taught to associate truth with instability, arrogance, or confusion. The body is spared, but the message is weakened. 4. Law and legitimacy. Truth rewritten as a crime. One of the most effective ways to punish truth has always been through law, because law gives punishment the appearance of fairness, order, and necessity. Rather than silencing truth directly, power renames it. Truth becomes treason, subversion, corruption of the people, spreading panic, threatening national security. Once truth is given a criminal label, society itself begins to demand punishment, believing it is defending stability, not suppressing reality. At this point, truth is no longer opposed by authority alone. It is opposed by the crowd. 5. Modern times. Erasure instead of execution. In the modern world, truth is rarely punished through public execution, but it is punished through invisibility. The truth teller is not burned. They are ignored, ridiculed, drowned in noise, algorithmically buried, professionally destroyed, or socially isolated. These punishments are quieter but equally effective, because humans are social beings, and social exclusion can be as psychologically devastating as physical punishment. Truth is not eliminated, it is made irrelevant. 6. The final irony. Punishment before acceptance. Perhaps the most tragic pattern in history is this. Truths that were once punished often become widely accepted later, sometimes even celebrated, while the people who first spoke them are remembered as martyrs only after they have paid the ultimate price. This reveals a crucial insight. The problem is rarely whether truth is correct. The problem is whether society is ready to bear the pain that truth brings. Truth is punished not because it is false, but because it arrives too early, when accepting it would require too much change, too much responsibility, and too much loss of comfort. So history does not show us a hatred of truth. It shows us a fear of transformation. And until humanity learns to value truth more than stability, truth will continue to be punished first, not for what it says, but for what it forces people to confront. In the ancient world, truth was not punished because it was false, but because it was unstable, because early civilizations were built on fragile agreements about order, gods, hierarchy, and meaning, and any truth that questioned these agreements threatened to collapse the delicate balance that kept society together. Ancient societies did not separate truth from order. To them, truth was not simply about reality, it was about harmony, about keeping the world predictable, the gods satisfied, and the social hierarchy intact. And when truth disrupted that harmony, it was no longer considered wisdom, but danger. In this world, asking the wrong question could be more dangerous than giving the wrong answer. Truth versus order in early civilizations. Most ancient civilizations depended on shared myths, stories that explained why kings ruled, why priests interpreted the gods, why social classes existed, and why suffering was necessary. And these myths were not viewed as lies, but as stabilizing truths, because they provided coherence in a chaotic and uncertain world. Truth that aligned with these myths was praised as wisdom. Truth that contradicted them was treated as corruption. This is why truth in the ancient world was judged not by accuracy, but by usefulness, by whether it preserved order or introduced doubt, because doubt threatened unity, and unity was survival. The crime of questioning. The most dangerous act in the ancient world was not rebellion. It was questioning, because rebellion could be crushed with force, but questioning spread invisibly, turning certainty into uncertainty and uncertainty into fear. Once people began to ask, "Why do we believe this?" or "Who benefits from this belief?" Authority lost its divine appearance and became something human, constructed, and therefore vulnerable. This is why early punishments of truth often took the form of public shaming, exile, or execution, not to refute ideas but to eliminate doubt before it spread. Athens, the illusion of free thought. Ancient Athens liked to see itself as the birthplace of reason, democracy, and philosophical inquiry, a society where ideas competed freely and truth emerged through debate. Yet this image collapses when we examine how Athens responded to truths that challenged its self-conception. Athens tolerated disagreement only as long as disagreement did not undermine collective identity. When Socrates began asking seemingly simple questions about justice, virtue, and wisdom, he did not present an alternative ideology. He exposed ignorance, and this exposure was deeply humiliating for a society that believed itself enlightened. Socrates did not threaten Athens with violence. He threatened it with self-awareness. His method revealed that many Athenians defended beliefs they could not explain, values they could not justify, and moral claims they could not examine, and this realization created psychological pain because it shattered the comforting belief that they were wise simply by belonging to a wise city. Athens did not punish Socrates for being wrong. It punished him for making people uncomfortable. His execution demonstrates a crucial ancient pattern. When truth produces shame instead of pride, society often chooses to destroy the mirror rather than confront the reflection. Philosophy as a threat. Ancient philosophers were dangerous not because they rejected the gods outright, but because they redefined the source of truth, shifting it away from tradition and authority toward reason and inquiry. And this shift threatened priestly power, political legitimacy, and social hierarchy. To say that truth could be discovered through thinking rather than inherited belief was revolutionary, because it implied that anyone could question, and if anyone could question, then no authority was beyond scrutiny. This was intolerable. Philosophy in the ancient world often walked a narrow line between wisdom and punishment, celebrated when it reinforced order, condemned when it destabilized it. Plato's warning. Plato, Socrates' student, understood this danger deeply, which is why he framed truth not as liberation, but as burden, describing the philosopher as someone who sees reality clearly but is punished for trying to share it, because people accustomed to shadows will always resist light. Plato's famous cave allegory was not optimistic. It was a warning that societies prefer illusion when illusion feels safer than truth, and that those who attempt to awaken others risk hostility, ridicule, and death. Truth, exile, and silence. In the ancient world, punishment of truth did not always mean execution. Often it meant exile, silence, or erasure from public life, because removing someone from the community was equivalent to death in societies where identity depended on belonging. To be cast out was to lose voice, memory, and meaning. In the Middle Ages, truth did not disappear. It became dangerous because it no longer belonged to inquiry, but to authority, and once truth is owned by power, any alternative explanation becomes not a disagreement, but a crime. Unlike the ancient world, where truth threatened social harmony, the medieval world transformed truth into something sacred and untouchable, guarded by religious and political institutions that claimed exclusive rights to interpretation, meaning that truth was no longer discovered. It was declared. And what is declared can be defended with punishment. Truth as sacred order. Medieval society was built on a fragile but powerful promise that the universe was ordered, purposeful, and morally structured, with God at the top, kings ruling by divine right, and every person occupying a predetermined place in the hierarchy. And this structure gave meaning to suffering, obedience, and inequality. Truth in this system was not meant to be questioned, because questioning truth meant questioning God's design, and questioning God's design meant threatening the moral foundation of the entire world. This is why medieval truth was not flexible. It had to be stable, and stability demanded silence. The rise of heresy as a weapon. Once truth became sacred, disagreement became heresy, and heresy was not treated as error, but as contamination, because a wrong idea could spread, infect others, and destabilize belief, which made truth policing a matter of survival rather than debate. Heresy was dangerous not because it disproved doctrine, but because it invited people to think independently, and independent thinking weakened the authority of institutions that relied on obedience rather than understanding. To label an idea heretical was to end the conversation. Evidence no longer mattered. Logic no longer mattered. Loyalty did. The Inquisition. Fear institutionalized. The creation of inquisitorial courts formalized the punishment of truth, turning belief into a legal matter where suspicion alone could justify interrogation, imprisonment, or execution, and truth was measured not by reality but by conformity. Confession was valued more than accuracy. Repentance mattered more than evidence. This revealed a terrifying reality. Medieval power was less concerned with what was true than with what was repeated, because repetition maintained unity while truth created fracture. Knowledge as a threat. Books became dangerous. Ideas became dangerous. Translation became dangerous, because literacy allowed individuals to encounter truth without mediation, bypassing priests and authorities who had long controlled interpretation, making access to knowledge itself a threat to power. This is why books were censored, libraries controlled, and learning restricted, because once truth could be read privately, authority lost its monopoly over meaning. Knowledge without permission was rebellion. The fear of interpretation. The medieval world feared interpretation more than ignorance. Ignorance preserved obedience. Interpretation created autonomy. If people could interpret scripture, morality, or reality for themselves, they would no longer need intermediaries, and a society without intermediaries is a society where power becomes unnecessary. So interpretation was punished, not because it was wrong, but because it was free. Punishment as moral cleansing. Execution in the Middle Ages was rarely presented as cruelty. It was presented as purification. Fire, exile, imprisonment, and public humiliation were framed as acts of moral defense, protecting society from corruption, because when truth is treated as sacred, destroying dissent becomes an act of righteousness. This allowed ordinary people to participate in punishment without guilt, believing they were defending goodness itself. Truth did not die quietly, it burned publicly. The psychological dimension. The medieval punishment of truth also served a psychological function. It reassured society that the world was still ordered, that doubt could be eliminated, and that authority remained unchallenged, because watching truth punished restored a sense of certainty, even if that certainty was built on fear. People did not need truth, they needed reassurance. The hidden cost. Yet beneath the appearance of unity, something vital was lost. Curiosity was suppressed. Innovation slowed. Fear replaced wonder. Truth survived only in fragments, hidden in monasteries, whispered in private, or postponed to a future generation, because the medieval world did not destroy truth completely. It delayed it, sometimes, by centuries. The pattern continues. By the end of the Middle Ages, a clear pattern had solidified. Truth defined by authority is unquestionable. Truth discovered independently is dangerous. Truth that spreads freely must be punished. This pattern did not end with the Middle Ages. It merely changed its language. The Renaissance is often remembered as a celebration of truth, art, science, and human potential. But this romantic image hides a darker reality because the Renaissance did not free truth. It reintroduced it into a world that had grown comfortable without it, and whenever truth returns after a long silence, power reacts not with joy, but with fear. The Renaissance was not a clean break from the Middle Ages. It was a collision, a moment when ancient knowledge resurfaced inside medieval structures that were never designed to tolerate questioning, and this collision produced brilliance, conflict, and punishment at the same time. Truth did not arrive shouting, it arrived quietly. Through books, paintings, measurements, and forgotten texts. Humanism, truth moves from heaven to humanity. Renaissance, humanism shifted attention away from divine hierarchy and toward human experience, reason, and observation, suggesting that truth could be found not only through revelation, but through study, inquiry, and self-examination, an idea that subtly undermined centuries of religious and political authority. If humans could understand the world on their own, then power was no longer the sole interpreter of reality. This idea alone was destabilizing. Truth became something individuals could seek, not something institutions could merely declare, and once truth becomes searchable, control begins to slip. Art as dangerous truth. Renaissance art was not just beauty, it was defiance. Artists portrayed the human body realistically, imperfectly, emotionally, breaking from symbolic medieval forms and reminding viewers that humanity was not merely sinful flesh awaiting judgment, but a subject worthy of study and admiration. This realism challenged theological narratives that depended on human smallness and guilt. Truth appeared on canvas, and once truth becomes visible, it cannot be easily erased. Science reawakens, observation over obedience. The most dangerous Renaissance truth was methodological, not factual, the idea that observation mattered more than authority. Figures like Galileo Galilei embodied this shift by insisting that reality could be tested, measured, and verified independently of tradition, and this insistence shattered the assumption that truth flowed downward from institutions. Truth no longer needed permission. This terrified power, because a truth that anyone could verify was a truth no one could monopolize. Punishment evolves. During the Renaissance, truth was not always punished with fire. It was punished with censorship, forced recantation, exile, surveillance, delayed publication. The body was spared more often than before, but the voice was constrained, because silencing ideas quietly is often more effective than killing them publicly. Truth survived, but under pressure. The Renaissance reveals a crucial lesson. When truth returns after suppression, power does not immediately collapse. It adapts. The modern era promised liberation. Science advanced. Democracies emerged. Rights were declared. Truth was no longer supposed to be punished. Yet this promise was incomplete. The modern world did not end the punishment of truth. It refined it, from sacred truth to official truth. In the modern era, truth shifted from being sacred to being official, meaning it was no longer protected by divine authority, but by institutions, states, laws, and systems of expertise. And once truth becomes official, disagreement becomes not heresy, but subversion. The language changed. The fear did not. Truth that aligned with institutions was labeled objective. Truth that challenged them was labeled dangerous, irresponsible, or destabilizing. Law as a tool of truth control. Modern societies discovered that the most effective way to punish truth was not violence, but legality. Truth was reframed as treason, sedition, leaking, spreading panic, misinformation. Once truth is criminalized, punishment appears justified, orderly, and necessary, allowing societies to suppress reality while believing they are protecting stability. Mass media, truth versus narrative. With the rise of mass media, truth entered a new battlefield. Now, truth did not compete with silence. It competed with noise. When too many stories exist, the most repeated one wins, not the most accurate one. And this environment favors power because power controls reach, framing, and repetition. Truth is no longer burned, it is drowned. Psychology of the modern crowd. Modern punishment of truth relies heavily on social mechanisms. Ridicule, character assassination, public shaming, professional destruction, digital exile. The goal is not to disprove truth, but to make the truth-teller untrustworthy, because once trust is gone, evidence no longer matters. This mirrors ancient patterns, only faster, whistleblowers and the old pattern. Modern truth-tellers are often insiders, journalists, scientists, analysts, and this makes them especially dangerous because truth from within cannot be dismissed as ignorance. So they are framed as traitors, enemies of security, irresponsible actors. Their punishment serves as a warning. Knowledge is allowed. Disclosure is not. The final illusion. The modern world likes to believe. It no longer punishes truth, but history suggests otherwise. Truth is still punished, just more politely. There are fewer flames, more paperwork, fewer executions, more erasures, and this makes modern punishment more efficient because it appears civilized. The unbroken pattern across the Renaissance and into the modern era, one pattern remains unchanged. Truth expands awareness. Awareness weakens control. Power responds with punishment. Only the methods evolve. The Renaissance taught humanity how to rediscover truth. The modern era taught power how to manage it. And this leaves us with an uncomfortable realization. Truth is no longer forbidden. It is filtered. Not everyone is stopped from speaking, but very few are allowed to be heard. Why do people still speak it? If telling the truth leads to prison, exile, or death, if history repeatedly shows that truth is punished faster than lies, if power responds to honesty with violence or erasure, then why has truth never fallen silent? Logic says, stay quiet and survive. History says, they spoke and they died. This contradiction is not a flaw in human behavior. It is the deepest proof of what it means to be human. People who speak truth rarely do so because they want to be heroes. They are not chasing legacy. They are not trying to become martyrs. Most of them simply reach a moment where living inside a lie becomes impossible. At that moment, truth stops being an idea. It becomes conscience. Socrates knew that questioning would cost him his life, yet he also knew that a life without examination was not worth living, because survival without integrity is a quieter form of death, one that leaves the body intact but empties the soul. He could have fled. He could have apologized. He could have stayed silent. But silence would have meant betraying himself. Galileo Galilei saw the heavens move with his own eyes, and once truth is seen, it cannot be unseen because pretending not to know is still knowing, and knowing while lying fractures the mind. He recanted publicly, but the truth had already escaped him, and that escape was irreversible. Giordano Bruno understood something even more terrifying, that truth can expand reality beyond the limits power needs to control, and once the universe becomes infinite, no authority can stand at its center. He was offered life in exchange for denial. He chose death instead of shrinking reality, because living in a lie would have meant living in a cage too small for his mind. Thomas More could have survived with a single sentence, a single public affirmation of power, but that sentence would have erased the boundary between truth and obedience, and once that boundary disappears, a person is alive only in name. So he stayed silent, and silence cost him everything. These people did not speak because they believed they would win. They did not speak because they expected justice. They spoke because silence would have destroyed them from the inside. Truth forces a choice that power cannot eliminate. Protect your body or protect yourself. Many choose survival. Some choose truth. And those who choose truth often die first. Yet something extraordinary happens after they are gone. The body is destroyed. The voice is silenced. The name is condemned. But the truth remains. Truth does not need its speaker to survive immediately. It only needs time. History is filled with graves of truth-tellers, but it is also filled with overturned lies. This is the unbearable irony power can never escape. Killing the truth-teller does not kill the truth, it only delays it. Truth is spoken because silence has a cost too. A cost measured in moral decay, in normalized injustice, in societies that continue breathing but forget what it means to live honestly. Truth is spoken because without it, humanity becomes efficient but empty, orderly but hollow, stable but lost. So when people ask why truth is spoken even when it leads to death, the answer is not courage. It is necessity. Truth is spoken because there comes a moment when not speaking is a greater loss than dying. Not to change the world immediately, not to defeat power, not to be remembered, but to remain human. Moral responsibility. Is silence also a crime? And the final question, maybe truth does not win. Maybe it is only delayed. There comes a moment in every honest mind when truth stops being a theory and becomes a weight, when it no longer asks to be understood, but demands to be answered. Because once you see something clearly, you are no longer innocent, and ignorance is no longer an excuse. This is where conscience is born. Conscience is not comfort, it is not peace, it is not certainty. Conscience is the moment you realize that knowing creates responsibility, and that responsibility does not disappear simply because speaking is dangerous. This is where silence enters the story. Silence is often misunderstood as neutrality, but silence is rarely empty, because silence, when truth is known, becomes a choice, and every choice carries moral weight. History remembers many criminals, but it is shaped even more by those who knew and stayed silent. This raises the most uncomfortable question of all. Is silence also a crime? Not legally, not officially, but morally. When injustice continues because no one speaks, when lies survive because they are unchallenged, when power remains unaccountable because truth is buried under fear, silence stops being passive. It becomes participation. This is why conscience is so painful. Because conscience does not allow you to hide behind the crowd, the law, or the excuse of survival. Conscience whispers, you know. And once you know, you cannot unknow. Moral responsibility is not heroism. Most people who speak truth are not heroes. They are ordinary individuals who reach a point where continuing to live comfortably inside a lie becomes more unbearable than the consequences of speaking, because silence begins to corrode the self, slowly, invisibly, until a person is alive but divided. This division is psychological torture. You wake up knowing something is wrong. You go to sleep pretending it is not your problem. Day after day, this fracture grows. And at some point, the question is no longer, will I be punished for speaking? The question becomes, what am I becoming if I don't? This is moral responsibility, not a desire to change the world, but a refusal to let the world change you into something unrecognizable. History's quiet accusers. When we look back at history, we often focus on the truth-tellers who were punished. But behind every punished voice stands 1,000 silent witnesses, people who knew the truth privately, whispered it cautiously, but never defended it publicly. They survived. They kept their positions, their families, their safety, But history does not remember them as neutral. It remembers them as absent. And absence in moments of moral crisis is never neutral. This is why figures like Socrates still haunt us, not because he died, but because so many others lived by staying quiet. This is why Giordano Bruno burns in memory, while the thousands who watched the fire fade into anonymity. Truth does not only judge tyrants, it judges spectators, the illusion of victory. We often say, truth always wins, but history suggests something more unsettling. Truth does not win quickly. Truth does not win cleanly. Truth does not win without casualties. In fact, truth often loses in the short term. It is silenced. It is mocked. It is punished. It is buried. Empires fall before truth is acknowledged. Generations pass before lies collapse. This leads to a terrifying realization. Maybe truth does not win. Maybe it only survives. And survival is not the same as victory. Truth as a delayed force. Truth behaves like a delayed explosion. It does not stop injustice immediately. It does not save the speaker. It does not prevent suffering, but it changes the future's ability to lie comfortably. A punished truth plants doubt. A silenced truth creates cracks. An executed truth leaves questions behind, and those questions refuse to die. This is why power fears truth even when it seems defeated, because truth does not need to triumph today. It only needs to remain possible tomorrow. Why speak then? If truth is delayed, if the speaker dies first, if justice comes too late, why speak at all? Because silence guarantees permanence. Silence allows lies to become tradition. Silence allows injustice to become normal. Silence teaches the next generation that fear is wisdom. Truth may be delayed, but silence locks the delay in place. Speaking does not guarantee victory, but silence guarantees defeat. The final burden of conscience does not promise safety. It does not promise success. It only asks one question. When this moment becomes history, where will you stand? Truth is spoken not because it is effective, but because it is necessary. Not because it wins, but because without it, humanity loses itself completely. So maybe truth does not conquer. Maybe it simply waits. Waits for a generation strong enough to carry it without killing the messenger. Waits for a moment when survival is no longer the highest value. Waits for someone who decides that silence costs more than punishment. And when that moment comes, truth does not arrive as a victory parade. It arrives quietly, as recognition, as shame, as responsibility, and history finally whispers, they were right, but always too late. The modern world likes to believe it has solved the problem of truth, that censorship belongs to the past, that violence against ideas is outdated, and that freedom of expression has finally liberated humanity from fear. But the truth has not disappeared. It has changed its battlefield. In the modern world, truth is not usually burned, imprisoned, or publicly executed. It is buried alive. From forbidden truth to overloaded truth. In earlier eras, truth was dangerous because it was rare. Today, truth is dangerous because it is indistinguishable. The modern human does not lack information. They are drowning in it. News, opinions, data, images, outrage, and narratives arrive faster than the mind can process, creating an environment where truth no longer competes with lies directly, but competes with noise, and noise almost always wins. When everything is urgent, nothing is important. When everything claims to be true, truth itself loses weight. This is the first modern punishment of truth. Exhaustion. People are not silenced, they are overwhelmed. Truth without consequences. In the modern world, truth can be spoken openly and still change nothing. This is a new and terrifying development. A revelation can circulate globally in seconds, generate outrage for a day, and then vanish beneath the next wave of distraction, because outrage has become a cycle, not a response. And the system has learned that it does not need to suppress truth if it can simply outlast attention. Truth becomes content, and content is consumed, not acted upon. This creates the illusion of moral participation. People feel informed, angry, and engaged, while nothing structurally changes. The system remains intact, algorithms as invisible gatekeepers. Modern power does not need to decide what is true. It only decides what is visible. Algorithms shape reality silently, not by censoring truth, but by prioritizing engagement, emotion, and repetition. And truth, which is often complex and uncomfortable, performs poorly in an environment optimized for speed, simplicity, and emotional reward. Lies spread faster because they are easier. Nuance is punished because it is slow. Truth becomes algorithmically disadvantaged. No authority needs to say, "You cannot speak." The system simply ensures that few will hear you. The illusion of free choice. Modern individuals believe they choose what they consume. In reality, they choose from what is presented, and what is presented is shaped by incentives, profit, control, attention, and predictability. Truth that challenges identity, comfort, or belonging is filtered out not by force, but by preference engineering, because people are shown what reinforces their beliefs, not what challenges them. This creates echo chambers where truth is no longer contested, but customized. Every group has its own truth, and when truth becomes tribal, dialogue collapses. When everyone has a truth, no one has the truth. The modern world celebrates my truth and your truth, framing truth as personal experience rather than shared reality. And while this language protects individual expression, it also dissolves accountability. If truth is subjective, then lies cannot be disproven, only disagreed with. This weakens truth's power to demand change. Truth becomes opinion, and opinion carries no obligation. Punishment without violence. Modern punishment of truth is subtle. It comes as ridicule, professional destruction, online harassment, social exile, reputation assassination. The truth teller is not killed. They are isolated. And isolation in a connected world is devastating. The message is clear. You may speak, but you will speak alone. Speed versus reflection. Modern society moves too fast for truth. Truth requires time to verify, time to reflect, time to change. But modern systems reward immediacy. The faster the reaction, the higher the visibility. This environment favors outrage over understanding, slogans over substance, and certainty over honesty, making truth feel slow, boring, and inconvenient. And what feels inconvenient is ignored. The moral cost of convenience. The greatest danger of the modern world is not that truth is hidden, but that people stop caring whether something is true, as long as it is useful, comforting, or affirming. Truth becomes optional. And when truth is optional, morality becomes negotiable. People learn to ask, does this benefit me, rather than, is this true? This is not ignorance, it is resignation. Silence reimagined in the modern world. Silence does not always mean saying nothing. It can mean scrolling past, changing the channel, choosing not to engage, calling truth too depressing. This silence is socially acceptable, even encouraged, and it is far more effective than censorship. Truth as resistance. Yet even now, truth persists, not because it is protected, but because it is necessary. Truth survives in long-form thought, in slow conversations, in uncomfortable questions, and in individuals who refuse to reduce reality to slogans, even when it costs them popularity, safety, or belonging. Truth in the modern world is no longer revolutionary by default. It is resistant. It resists speed. It resists simplification. It resists comfort. The final paradox. The modern world has never allowed truth to be spoken so freely and never made it so easy to ignore. Truth is no longer forbidden. It is optional, and that may be the most dangerous condition truth has ever faced. Because when truth is forbidden, people seek it. But when truth is optional, people abandon it. And yet, history suggests something hopeful. Truth does not disappear forever. It waits. It waits for moments of crisis, when illusions collapse, when comfort fails, and when reality demands attention again. Because no system can function indefinitely on lies. Eventually, reality interrupts. And when it does, truth returns, not as information, but as consequence. How modern truth is shaped, punished, and controlled. In the modern world, truth is rarely executed in public squares. It is executed in headlines, comment sections, algorithms, and reputations. Truth has not disappeared, but it has been turned into something fragile. A piece of content fighting for attention inside a marketplace designed for speed, emotion, and tribal loyalty. And that changes everything. Because when truth must survive inside media systems, it is no longer judged primarily by whether it is accurate. It is judged by whether it is clickable, shareable, outrage-inducing, and compatible with what the audience already wants to believe. That is how truth gets punished today. Not always by censorship, but by distortion, drowning, and social consequences. 1. Media where truth becomes a product. Traditional media once positioned itself as a gatekeeper of truth. Editors, journalists, and institutions filtering information, verifying facts, and presenting reality to the public as a shared reference point. But modern media economies evolved into attention economies, and attention has a brutal law. What gets attention survives. What doesn't get attention disappears. Truth is often slow, complex, uncertain, and nuanced. Attention favors speed, certainty, drama, and conflict. So modern media tends to reward simple narratives, clear villains and heroes, emotional language, immediate conclusions, constant urgency. And truth, if it wants to survive, must either adapt to this format or be replaced by something more profitable. This is why truth often arrives with a costume. It becomes a story, a frame, a spin. Not necessarily a lie, but a shape designed to compete. And that competition creates a new punishment. The truth is forced to simplify itself. And when truth is simplified, it becomes vulnerable to manipulation. The media paradox. Media can reveal truth, but it can also reduce truth to entertainment. A scandal becomes a show, a tragedy becomes content, a moral crisis becomes a trend. And when truth becomes a trend, it has an expiration date. 2. Social networks, where truth loses to velocity. Social media did not destroy truth. It changed the rules of survival. On social platforms, information spreads not because it is accurate, but because it triggers human psychology. And human psychology spreads fear, outrage, disgust, tribal pride, moral certainty. Factual truth is rarely as emotionally efficient as a viral narrative. So in social networks, truth competes against the most powerful technology on Earth, the share button connected to human emotion. Why lies spread faster? Lies are often designed to be simpler, more shocking, more satisfying, more morally clear, more identity-affirming. Truth is often complicated, conditional, mixed, slow to verify, uncomfortable. So truth is punished by the platform's design, not by explicit censorship. The algorithm does not hate truth. It loves engagement, and engagement is often anti-truth. Echo chambers. Truth becomes tribal. Social networks build personalized worlds. People do not receive the same reality. They receive reality that matches their preferences. Over time, this produces echo chambers where disagreement feels like an attack, facts become weapons, and truth becomes loyalty. This creates a terrifying outcome. People stop asking, "Is it true?" and start asking, "Is it ours?" And once truth becomes tribal, every truth teller becomes a potential enemy. 3. Cancel culture. Modern punishment without courts. In older eras, punishment was legal. In the modern world, punishment is often social. Cancel culture is not one single thing. It includes real accountability, mob behavior, reputational destruction, and moral signaling, all mixed together in a fast-moving digital environment that rarely allows reflection. At its best, it exposes harm. At its worst, it becomes a public execution without due process. And this matters for truth because social punishment changes what people are willing to say. The fear mechanism. The modern fear is not always prison. It is losing your job, losing your audience, being publicly shamed, being labeled forever, being reduced to a screenshot, being turned into a symbol. This fear does not require the state. It requires the crowd. And crowds punish faster than courts. Cancel culture becomes a truth control system when it rewards moral certainty over accuracy, speed over context, punishment over understanding. In this environment, many people self-censor, not because they have nothing true to say, but because truth often needs nuance and nuance is risky. The collapse of nuanced truth often sounds like, "It's complicated. There are multiple causes. We don't know everything yet." But online environments reward, "This is evil. This is obvious. Anyone who disagrees is a monster." So truth is punished by being too human, too slow, too careful, too uncertain. And that is why many truth-tellers become silent. Not because they are wrong, but because the cost of being misunderstood is too high. 4. Whistleblowers, the most dangerous truth-tellers. Whistleblowers are modern truth's most dramatic form because they reveal truth from inside the system. And truth from inside cannot be dismissed as ignorance. That is why whistleblowers are treated as existential threats, not just to reputations but to structures of power. Whistleblowers do something that ancient truth-tellers could not always do. They provide documents, proof, receipts, and yet, even with proof, the system's first move is often not to debate the truth. It is to destroy the person. The classic modern pattern. When a whistleblower speaks, the system usually responds in stages. Deny the claim, attack the person, question their motives, label them disloyal or dangerous, shift attention to procedure. How did they leak it? Punish them to discourage others. Notice something crucial. The debate becomes less about what was revealed and more about whether the revealer had the right to reveal it. This is extremely effective because it reframes truth as a violation. Truth becomes illegal. Truth becomes irresponsible. Truth becomes a threat to security. And once truth is framed as a threat, punishment becomes not cruelty but protection. Why whistleblowers are called traitors? Because modern power depends on loyalty narratives. A whistleblower breaks the loyalty spell. They force society to compare what institutions claim versus what institutions do. This comparison destroys legitimacy. So the whistleblower is labeled traitor, extremist, unstable attention seeker, enemy agent, not to disprove the truth, but to poison the audience against hearing it. The tragedy: whistleblowers often sacrifice everything: career, safety, identity, relationships, freedom. And even then, the truth they reveal may still be delayed, diluted, or forgotten, because the modern system does not need to erase truth completely. It only needs to exhaust attention. So the whistleblower becomes another modern martyr, not burned at the stake, but burned in public opinion. 5. The modern conclusion. Truth is not silenced. It is reframed in the modern world. Truth is rarely killed directly. It is reframed. A fact becomes a narrative, a talking point, propaganda, misinformation, a conspiracy, biased reporting. Once truth is reframed as merely one story among many, it loses its force to demand change. It becomes optional, and optional truth is powerless truth. 6. Why this era is more dangerous than the past. In older times, truth was forbidden, and forbidden things attract seekers. Today, truth is everywhere, and that makes it easy to ignore. The modern punishment is not silence, it is meaninglessness. Truth is reduced to content, buried under distraction and replaced by endless emotional cycles. And yet, the ancient pattern remains. Truth destabilizes, power responds, the crowd participates. Only now the flames are digital, the trials are trending, and the executions happen through reputation. If truth is always punished, is silence really safe? Throughout this journey, we have seen the same pattern repeat itself across centuries, cultures, and systems. Truth appears, power feels threatened, and punishment follows, sometimes immediately, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, sometimes invisibly, but always predictably. Truth is questioned, truth is reframed, truth is punished. And standing beside this pattern is another, quieter one. Silence. Silence that looks harmless. Silence that looks rational. Silence that looks like survival. At first glance, silence seems safe. If speaking the truth leads to exile, destruction, or death, then silence appears to be wisdom, restraint, even maturity, because silence promises protection, continuity, and peace, at least on the surface. But history asks a darker question. Has silence ever truly been safe? The illusion of safety. Silence offers short-term security. You keep your position, you keep your relationships, you keep your life. But silence also has a cost, one that is not always visible, measured, or immediate. When truth is known and not spoken, something subtle begins to decay. Not society first, not institutions first, but the individual. Silence slowly separates a person into two selves, the one who knows and the one who pretends not to. This internal division is not peace, it is corrosion. History is filled not only with the names of those who spoke and were punished, but with the shadows of those who remained silent and lived comfortably inside systems they privately knew were wrong. They survived. But survival is not the same as innocence. Silence as participation. Silence is often defended as neutrality, but neutrality only exists when no harm is occurring, and once injustice is visible, silence stops being neutral and starts becoming functional, because systems of power do not survive only on lies. They survive on cooperation, and silence is one of the most efficient forms of cooperation. When no one speaks, lies harden into norms. When no one resists, injustice becomes routine. When no one questions, power stops needing justification. Silence does not create tyranny, but it allows it to breathe. The forgotten question of responsibility. Modern societies often ask, what right did they have to speak? But history asks a more uncomfortable question. What responsibility did those who knew have to speak? Moral responsibility does not require heroism. It begins with awareness. Once something is seen clearly, once truth is recognized, the option to remain morally untouched disappears, because knowing creates responsibility, whether it is accepted or not. This is why silence is tempting, because silence delays responsibility, but it does not erase it. The long-term consequences of silence. Truth-tellers often pay the price immediately. Silence, however, delays its payment. The cost appears later, in normalized cruelty, in inherited injustice, in systems that grow more extreme because no one resisted them early, in societies that suddenly collapse under truths they avoided too long. History shows that silence rarely protects people forever. It protects them until the system no longer needs them. And when that moment arrives, silence offers no defense. The final paradox. Here lies the paradox humanity refuses to face. Speaking truth is dangerous, but silence is not harmless. Truth may get you punished quickly. Silence punishes slowly. Truth may cost you everything at once. Silence takes something every day, a bit of integrity, a bit of honesty, a bit of self-respect, until one day nothing remains worth protecting. Does truth win? We often say truth always wins, but history is more honest than that. Truth does not always win. Sometimes it loses for generations. Sometimes it is buried so deeply that those who spoke it never see justice. But there is something truth does that silence never can. Truth leaves a trace. Even when punished, it creates cracks. Even when erased, it plants doubt. Even when defeated, it limits how comfortable lies can become. Silence leaves nothing. No trace, no resistance, no interruption, only continuity. The question we cannot escape. So perhaps the question is not whether truth is dangerous. We already know it is. The real question is this: if truth is always punished, is silence really safe? Safe for whom? For how long? At what cost? And when this moment becomes history, when future generations look back at this era, will silence be remembered as wisdom, or as the quiet space where injustice was allowed to grow? Because in the end, truth does not only judge those who speak, it judges those who knew and chose not to. Before we end this journey, there is one thing history has always done better than giving answers. It asks questions. And now those questions are no longer for philosophers, martyrs, or the dead. They are for us. So let us ask, slowly, honestly, without rushing to comfort. If truth has been punished in every era, if those who spoke paid the highest price, what makes us believe our time is different? And if we believe it is different, is that belief based on evidence or on convenience? If truth threatens power and power still exists, what exactly has changed? Is it the system or just the method? When we say, "I would have spoken back then," are we speaking from courage or from the safety of hindsight? Would we really have spoken when silence meant safety, when obedience meant belonging, when speaking meant isolation? Or do we only admire truth-tellers once the danger is gone? If truth is so valuable, why do we only celebrate it after it has been punished? Why are statues built for the dead, but living truth-tellers are treated as threats? When did we decide that truth is admirable in history books, but inconvenient in real life? If silence is not agreement, but we remain silent anyway, what exactly are we choosing? Are we choosing peace or postponement? Are we choosing survival or participation? If injustice continues not because everyone supports it, but because most people remain quiet, where does responsibility really lie? With the few who act, or with the many who know? If knowing creates responsibility, can ignorance still protect us once we suspect the truth? And if we suspect it, is silence still innocence? When we scroll past suffering, when we avoid uncomfortable facts, when we say this is too complicated, are we being rational, or are we rehearsing silence? At what point does protecting yourself become protecting the system? And at what point does silence stop being self-care and start becoming complicity? If truth always has consequences, but silence also has consequences, why do we pretend only one choice is dangerous? Which cost are we actually afraid of, external punishment or internal collapse? If truth destroys illusions, but illusions keep us comfortable, what are we really defending when we reject truth? comfort, identity, belonging. And if belonging requires silence, what kind of belonging is that? If truth isolates the speaker but silence isolates the conscience, which isolation is easier to live with? And which one lasts longer? When future generations look back, will they ask, why didn't they know? Or will they ask, why didn't they act? If truth was available but ignored, will ignorance still be an excuse? If silence keeps systems alive, but truth threatens them, what does that say about the systems we protect? Are they worth our quiet loyalty? If we say, now is not the right time, how many times has that sentence already delayed justice? And how many times has delay turned into permanence? If truth is delayed rather than defeated, what role do we play in that delay? Are we obstacle, or bridges? If every era believed it was too dangerous to speak, how did any progress ever happen? And if progress only happens because a few refuse silence, what does that say about the rest of us? Is courage rare, or is silence simply easier? If truth is heavy and silence feels light, are we avoiding truth because it is false, or because it asks something of us? What exactly does truth demand from you? A voice? A risk? A loss of comfort? A break with the crowd? And if you are not willing to give that, what are you willing to give instead? If truth does not guarantee victory, but silence guarantees continuation, which outcome are you choosing? Not in words, not in opinions, but in action, because history does not record intentions. It records effects. So here is the final question, the one history asks every generation, including ours. If truth has always been punished, and silence has never been harmless, what will you choose when knowing is no longer optional? And when this moment becomes history, what will your silence say about you?